Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. Before we get started today, I want to share that I am offering my free Boundaries Masterclass on March 18th. So, if you feel any confusion about boundaries, if you think that they don't work for you, or if you're afraid that setting them is going to make things worse for you, you will absolutely love this class. You're going to walk away feeling differently about boundaries than you ever could have imagined. Because once you see boundaries through my eyes, and I share all of the ways that they can create connection and really actually peace and make your life so much easier, you're going to be ready to give them a try. There is even going to be time where you can ask questions and get help creating your own boundaries. The link to register for the free Boundaries Masterclass is on my website, heatherrosscoaching.com, and it will also be in the show notes. So go sign up for that. And today I wanted to talk about something that came up in the Peaceful Moms group a couple of weeks ago because I thought that this is something that really is not talked about, but it's actually critical. And considering capability and capacity is so important. But so often, when people give us advice, they don't take those things into consideration. But when we ignore that, the costs for us and for our kids and for our relationship with them are huge. We all know that if you have a child struggling with substance use, everybody's full of advice. They say things like, he's 25, he should be out on his own by now, or she just needs to get a job and stick with it, or you do too much for him and that's why he struggles. So just stop helping him and he'll figure it out. He'll be fine. The problem is you helping him. And they say that without considering that all 25-year-olds are not the same. They don't all have the same capability or capacity. And I guarantee you, when somebody gives you that advice, they are not taking that into consideration. They are not asking those types of questions. But when I'm coaching somebody, those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. Like, how do we meet this person where they are? What is their kid's capacity? What is their capability? Are the expectations aligned with that? When somebody's struggling with substance use or mental health or they've experienced trauma, their capability and capacity can look very different than the world expects it to. So let's start by clarifying what I mean when I say capability and capacity. This isn't a question of are they good or bad? This is a question of what can their system actually handle right now? Capability is what somebody is capable of doing skill-wise at any given moment. Thinking clearly, regulating their emotions, their ability to solve problems and follow through on things, all right, their ability to function in everyday life. Each person has a different label or different level of capability, and those capabilities can vary across functions, right? We're not all capable the same in every area of our life. So somebody might be really capable at work, but they get home and there's a family conflict and they completely shut down. And then somebody else, they might be really calm in crisis, but they struggle with getting their work done on time. And capability can change depending on whether a person feels safe or threatened, whether they're in fight or flight. That impacts their capacity. Capacity is how much somebody can handle, like what what amount of stress they can handle, the emotional weight of things, how much responsibility they can handle, how much pressure, how much time demands are put on them. It's about their bandwidth. So, when a person's capacity is overloaded, their capability drops. So, a person might have skills and capability, but if they're exhausted, I mean, think about yourself, and overwhelmed or grieving or under chronic stress, those skills become harder to access. Like, I can't tell you how many parents reach out to me and say that they're like not even functioning because of the stress of what's happening with their kids. The their capacity has greatly decreased, and that has affected their capability. And even just in regular everyday life, our capability and capacity are constantly fluctuating. A great example of this that you might be familiar with if you lift weights is how some days you go in the gym and you're like full of energy and you're like really strong and lifting heavier than normal, maybe able to do more sets, more reps, and you're just feeling like on top of the world. You just had the best workout. And then, like, for seemingly no good reason, a couple of days later, you go back to the gym and you are just like so weak and you are just struggling. You're having to like lower the weights that you're lifting. You can do less sets. And it just like you just had to push yourself the whole way through it. Runners experience this too, like, they're in the flow, everything's going great, they have the best run, and then another day, their legs just feel like cement the whole time, and they can't wait to get it over with. I feel like this with my brain power sometimes and my ability to get work done. Like one day, the work is flowing out of me. I'm like super productive. I'm getting all this stuff done. And then another day, like I can't remember words. I can describe all the words, but I can't remember the actual words. And I feel like I worked all day, but I can't figure out what I accomplished. That's just that fluctuation in capability and capacity, and that ebb and flow is part of being human. But there are situations that we go through that cause bigger fluctuations that last longer. So that's why I think it's so important to consider both capability and capacity when you're trying to figure out how to support somebody. If you only look at capability, you might assume that that person lacks skills, but really they're actually overloaded. So, and then if you only look at capacity, you might underestimate what a person is capable of if they have the right support. So, when we have skills paired with a nurturing environment that strengthens our bandwidth, then we're able to grow. That's why in my Peaceful Moms group, we have calls that are based just on creating more bandwidth. They're nervous system regulation calls because you can learn new skills all day, but those skills don't matter if you don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to implement those skills. So that's why we focus on create that nervous system regulation in the group because that creates more of that bandwidth. So, this episode applies to us as parents and how we support ourselves as well. And it's important to look at capability on an individual basis because we can only take action based on what our system has access to in the moment. So, if we expect somebody to perform beyond their current capacity, whether it be emotionally, mentally, physically, like we get really frustrated and they feel frustrated too. And then that leads to us like labeling them as lazy or manipulative or resistant, unmotivated. But really, the real issue is that they're just not able to access higher functioning right now. But when we individualize capability, we shift from asking, why won't you? Why are you refusing to do this? To what's happening with you right now that's limiting your capabilities or capacity. That question opens the door to problem solving instead of power struggles. It helps us to match our expectation, our support, our boundaries to what's realistic for them, right? We can still encourage growth while we're doing that. We don't just give up, but we adjust our expectations to reality. We think about what's actually really possible. And so we're not lowering standards by looking at capability individually. We're just meeting them where they're at. It makes their ability to change much more effective. When our demands are aligned with somebody's current capacity or capability, and we pair that with creating a safe environment and offering skills, that person's capability increases. But when our demands ignore somebody's capacity, their stress response ramps up and they start to shut down. So it's also really important to acknowledge that some people have they have more limited capabilities than others, no matter how hard they tried. Like we all have a ceiling there. We're not created identically, genetically, our cognitive ability, the trauma that we've experienced, our mental health, physical health, IQ, executive functioning, our ability to regulate emotionally, the processing speed we have in our brain, our working memory, all of that varies from person to person. Some people have brain injuries or they have ADHD, they have a mental health condition, they have a learning difference. All of the effort in the world doesn't erase those realities. Most people can expand their capacity and capability when they feel safe and they have support, but that has a ceiling and it is different from person to person. So it's time for us to stop expecting everybody to be the same. And again, recognizing limits is not giving up on somebody. It is not making excuses for them. It's just allowing our expectations to be aligned with the reality of the situation. It's right there with acceptance. And the irony here is that when we have realistic expectations, then people are far more likely to do better. They're going to reach the upper limits of their capacity that way or their capability that way. So I want you to imagine that you have this job that requires more work from you than you could possibly ever get done. And it's not because you're lazy or unmotivated, it's just that the workload exceeds more than you could ever do. Somebody quit at work, and instead of them hiring somebody to fill that position, they decided that you could do both jobs. So before you even start the day, you feel defeated. Like you're driving to work and your heart is racing, you feel like crying. You park your car in the parking lot and you sit in your car dreading walking into that building because you know that you're behind before you ever even get started. And the more pressure you feel, the harder it is to even think clearly. Your coworkers are in the break room talking shit about you behind your back because you're missing deadlines and you're holding up the whole department. Your boss is always breathing down your neck and micromanaging you, questioning your effort. He doesn't understand why you can't handle it. And he just thinks you aren't trying hard enough or that you don't care. You try to explain that you're doing 2 jobs, which makes sense to you, but he just thinks you're making excuses. So just put yourself in that environment. You are not gonna be performing well. Your capability and your capacity will decrease dramatically. You aren't even be able probably you probably aren't even gonna be able to get done the amount of work that you could before that second job was added to your plate. You're probably gonna be doing less than before. Now I want you to imagine that same work scenario, but as you're driving to work, you're taking a deep breath because you know you have a supportive manager and coworkers. Instead of them huddling in the break room talking shit about you behind your back, they've considered the extra workload that you're taking on. And so instead of using that time to talk about you, they actually help you get your work done so that the whole department can move forward together as a team. And your boss acknowledges that what he has asked of you is a lot, but he tells you that he has faith that eventually you're gonna be able to gain some efficiencies, you'll be able to get both jobs done, and then you actually surprise yourself with how productive you are because you feel safe and calm and supported. It's a completely different experience. So you remember in that first work scenario where your boss accused you of not trying? That's something that parents really wrestle with. That question of, how do you know if your child just isn't trying or if they're really struggling with capability and capacity? So I really struggled with this section as I outlined this episode because I just kept running into all of these roadblocks about how I wanted to phrase this. Because at first, I was going to word it like, how do I know if my child is spoiled or if they're struggling with capability and capacity? But that got me thinking about somebody that I know who used to refer to their daughter as spoiled. But my experience with their daughter was that she was not spoiled. She was actually just really dysregulated. She's too young to understand what she's experiencing. And so her behavior resembled what we label as spoiled. But really, this kid has just experienced some trauma. She has a lot of emotions that are too big for her. Nobody has helped her work through those emotions. They just shame her and, tell her that she's acting out when she has them. So I think that the word spoiled places blame on a kid who really just needs consistent, regulated emotions and actions from their family. They need help understanding and processing their emotions. They need clear, consistent boundaries that create a sense of safety in them. But that is a really tall order. And it's a really tall order for the parents, and it's so much easier for her parents to call her spoiled and punish her because that's what society conditions us to do. From the time Helena was little, like, I can't believe that this was my fear of spoiling her, and it came from a good place, like, you hear that all the time, to not spoil kids because then they'll be entitled, and entitled kids are unhappy, and entitled kids don't have friends, nobody wants to hang out with them when they're spoiled. So even from, when she was a baby, I was, like, worried about picking her up too much because it would spoil her. I was worried about buying her too much because it would spoil her. I was worried about saying yes too much because it would spoil her. But what if instead of parenting from that fear of creating a weakness in her, I had parented from love and the goal of building strength in her? And what if instead of fear of spoiling her, I had thought things like, let me teach her that emotions are safe. Let me show her how to sit with deep disappointment. Let me model what emotional regulation looks like when things are really hard. Let me help her build an inner voice that doesn't blame her when she struggles. I had the focus on the wrong thing because what protected her wasn't less comfort. It was emotional safety that came from a consistent, regulated parent, which unfortunately she didn't have until, deep into her substance use when I found out what all those things were. What she needed was collaboration instead of punishment. And she needed me to teach her skills like emotional regulation instead of shaming her. So we need to focus on asking what is happening underneath this behavior instead of how do I stop this behavior? And of course, that requires us parents to have skills that we were never taught or even exposed to. And it requires us to regulate ourselves first, but that also requires a culture that values emotional capability and the individual differences as much as it values just getting people to comply in the easiest way possible. And as I'm thinking about this, it's helping me to see these things that I'm talking about here, like this fear of spoiling and this approach to parenting, might be one of the reasons that I took tough love advice when it didn't feel right. Because when I think about all of this and I think about who Helena was before the depression, the anxiety, the eating disorder, the self harm, the substance use, before all of that, Helena was the most motivated, determined, independent, reliable kid you can possibly imagine. I didn't even have to potty train her. I was just starting to think about it when she turned 2 and she just ripped off her diaper and started using the bathroom on her own. Like, I literally didn't have to do anything. And then another thing she did when she was 2 was she decided that she wanted to be able to buckle her shoes herself. And so one day she just spent hours on the couch until she figured it out. She didn't even want my help. She was just determined to do it on her own. And then when she got into sports, she was one of those kids who, like, was just all in on all the things that she wanted to do. And as she got older, like, she never complained. She was, like, always in the car ready to go to practice. When she was in competitive cheer, which had a very intense schedule. Like, she'd be practicing until 9 o'clock at night. We'd get home, closer to 9:30. Then she'd, like, have to shower and eat dinner, and she had to catch the bus at 6:30 in the morning, and she was always up and ready and out the door. Like, I never had to nag her about any of that stuff. She just naturally did it, and she went from being this kid who, I swear, her favorite mode of transportation was doing back walkovers and cartwheels. She never just walked anywhere. To She went from that to quitting sports and laying in bed in a dark room all the time. And nobody chooses or wants that life. Helena's capabilities did a 180 because her capacity changed. Now, at the time, it seemed to me like it had switched, like somebody turning a light on or off. But as I look back and knowing what I know now, I can see that there were traumas stacking up and they were slowly wearing down her capacity. And that wasn't laziness. It wasn't her being spoiled or not respecting me. It was a very sensitive, thoughtful, deeply feeling young girl whose system was completely overwhelmed. I believe that those traumas had changed her brain over time. Puberty probably intensified that, and her brain just shifted into survival mode. And the parts of her brain that helped her be this super calm, sweet, caring, reliable decision maker, before that, they just weren't available to her anymore. And during that time, I was always asking the wrong question. I was always asking, what is wrong with her? Not in a curious, what does she need way, but in a judgmental, whatever is wrong with her is really inconveniencing me, and I need her to fix it way. And when we ask low quality questions like that, like what is wrong with somebody, we get low quality answers. And low quality questions lead to focus on the problem instead of leading to solutions. So, asking if our kids are spoiled, lazy, or unmotivated, those are low quality questions. They're going to lead to more focus on what's wrong with them. They're not going to lead to helpful answers. But a more useful, high quality question that's going to help lead to solutions is, what is their capacity? What is their capability right now? I mean, it would be great if there was something like a thermometer where we could just scan their forehead and find the answer. It would make life so much easier. But since that does not exist, you have to stick with asking yourself high quality questions. And unfortunately, those high quality questions cannot give you a precise 98.6-degree answer, but they can at least point you in a more positive and helpful direction where you feel less pressure because parents feel so much pressure to try to get their kids to perform at a level that a lot of times they're just not capable of. And it makes your kids feel so misunderstood and judged. But when our expectations are more realistic, there's just so much more opportunity for connection. I mean, think about times when you felt like somebody really understood you and how good that feels and how connected you felt to that person. So, in the days following this episode, as you're thinking about it, I want you to notice kindly, like, don't judge yourself either. Like, this, we're all just learning and doing the best we can with the information that we have at the time. But as you're thinking about this episode and you feel tempted to label your son or daughter as lazy or spoiled or not trying or they don't care or whatever it is, just pause and ask yourself a high quality question. Like, what is their capability today? Like, realistically, what is their capacity today? And then just take the time to be still and listen to how your inner wisdom answers that question. That's it for today. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you found this episode helpful, it would be wonderful if you would take a moment to leave me a 5-star review. I haven't had a new review in a long time, and having current reviews is important because it helps parents who are looking for help in a podcast like this to know that this podcast is actually worth giving a try. So it would mean the world to me if you would leave me a 5-star review. And if you are tired of feeling stuck and scared and unsure of what to do next, you can schedule a road to recovery call with me. We will explore what is possible for you and your family when you have the support of somebody who truly understands and you don't have to navigate this alone anymore. The road to recovery call link is in the episode show notes and it's also on my website. Until next time, remember that taking care of yourself is not a luxury. It is a necessity because you matter too.